Horizon Giants, one UX, and this is First Opium War, Trade Deficits and the Macartney Embassy. Extra issue part 1 by the channel Extra Credits. The British Empire's grasp on the Americas was slipping right at the time when they needed those resources most. The massive amounts of tea they imported from China had created a huge trade deficit. But the Chinese were reluctant to let any European trade outside of the Canton port, strictly controlled by the Hong. So Britain sent a formal embassy led by Earl George Macartney. Is embassy in quotation mark, or is real embassy? Or is just, killing anybody who doesn't agree with them? Is that the case? I don't know, we'll see. Yeah, this is about, British and the, Chinese, about the tea. I didn't know that's what it's going to be when I saw First Opium War, but alright. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. Check out the reaction today. There's a link in the description. Check out the cast of the place. Check out the end cards, and yeah, let's watch it.
In 1792, Britain has just come out of a war that's cost it not only much of its national treasury, but also one of its most lucrative overseas colonies, North America. The empire needs new sources of revenue, new opportunities for trade, and there's one clear possibility: China. By the end of the 18th century, the world had become a much smaller place, with European traders traveling the globe to feed the hungry markets of the industrializing West. Wars were fought all over the planet to secure exotic goods or the raw materials needed to power new economies of the rising European empires. But China still remained aloof. Demand for Chinese goods was high. Silk, porcelain, and especially tea were coveted by buyers back in Europe. But the Chinese emperors saw all these foreign traders as a potentially destabilizing influence, and as they had done throughout Chinese history, placed strict controls on foreign trade. Specifically, they limited trade to just a few ports. Traders weren't allowed to set foot in the empire except at a handful of cities designated for that purpose. And all trade had to go through a trade monopoly known as the Hong, who could tax and regulate foreign trade as they saw fit. By the middle of the 18th century, this was taken further, and all foreign trade was restricted to a single port, Canton. This drove resentment among the European traders who saw limitless opportunity for profit if they could just get their hands on it. And those Europeans trading in China were, in some ways, a self-selecting group. If you're gonna make your living transporting goods thousands of miles from your home, you probably believe in the inherent value of unrestricted trade, which meant that these rules did not sit well with the Europeans, and piracy and smuggling began to rise. Even within the official channels of trade, merchants began to strain at these limitations. Eventually, an employee of the Honorable East...
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I'm surprised the British didn't just attack. I guess at the time they were suffering, right, after losing the Americas, so that might be the reason.
India Company, the militarized trade organization responsible for British affairs in India, pushed by what he saw as abuses of corrupt officials and undue restrictions on free trade, decided that it was time to openly break the rules that the Chinese imposed. He left Canton and took his grievances upriver, literally and figuratively, wanting to be heard by someone in the Chinese hierarchy who was outside the Hong, outside the monopoly set up in Canton. And here's where divides of culture come in, because it's possible that he wasn't acting in a way that he saw as malicious or even inappropriate. In fact, he may have been acting in a way that he thought of as perfectly reasonable were he in England. But he wasn't in England, and the arrogance of this trader just deciding that his complaints should be elevated to imperial court rather than going through the proper authorities was unbelievable to the Chinese. More than that,
it's surreal to see that, our difference of culture, how just way of thinking is different, right? He's probably thinking in that, democratic way that, obviously if there is an issue, if I talk about it, people are going to understand that, he's trying to make a point or something like that. But at the same time, the Chinese basically just thought, look at that, the basically balls on this guy, that he can just march in front of the emperor and talk to him. What an insult. So it's a complete way of thinking.
It put into question whether these Europeans would stay in one port at all, or even obey Chinese law. And so further restrictions were put into place. Trade was clamped down on even more. But European demands for Chinese goods, especially English demands for their newfound love of black tea, continued to grow, which brings us back to 1792. By this point, the British were importing tens of millions of pounds of tea every year. Within 2 decades, import duties on tea would account for 10% of the government's entire revenue. Tea was one of the major drivers of the economy. tea was so essential to the British world that the Canton system was simply no longer acceptable. And more than that, the British were now running an enormous trade deficit with the Chinese. Millions of pounds of silver were flowing out of the British Empire and into China. On top of that, recent European struggles had cut them off from the silver mines of South America, and costly foreign wars had left the treasury dry. Even the Honorable East India Company was broke, incurring a huge debt to finance their military conquests of parts of India. The
It's
British
the same
Empire,
time.
for all of its power and its wealth,
So I guess, the first time there was an uprising in India, right? That British basically closed it down the first time it happened. I guess this is the same time they lost the Americas, the same time they wanted a good trading deal with the China, but they were not giving them. So they were in really desperate times, I guess. Only thing I can see here and predict is that this is going to end really badly for the Chinese in the future. I guess we'll see.
for all its global might and territory in every region of the globe, simply did not have the raw currency it needed to continue paying for its tea habit. So, the British decided that it was time to finally send an official diplomatic mission to China. No more traders, merchants, or pirates. This was going to be a real envoy from one monarch to another to talk about opening up trade. After some consideration, it was decided that the first Earl of Macartney, a seasoned colonial governor, should lead the mission. His aims were simple: end the Canton system, establish a permanent embassy, or at least get a permanent British representative in the Imperial court, and, if possible, secure the grant of a small island off the coast of China where British merchants could operate under British rather than Chinese law. So they packed the hold of a ship with clocks and telescopes and even carriages to be presented to the Chinese emperor, and
See, the problem here is they are thinking that, whoever they're dealing with have the same mentality as them, that they, basically capitalism. Everybody profits, so what's wrong with that? That's their mentality. But that's not how Chinese are seeing things, right? They are seeing that influence of this Europeans might be a problem. So they're clamping down on that. They are not really seeking profit here, right? It's the outside influence they're feeding. So all the things that they want to do and they think that they can argue in front of the emperor, and emperor will basically agree. They are basing that on that, everybody profits, so everybody wins. He'll just agree with that. No, he won't, right? His issues are different.
began their trip. They sailed east around the Cape of Good Hope,
Whoa, that's
with
a long
only
distance.
one minor detour when the trade winds pushed them all the way to Rio de Janeiro. At last,
Okay, this is just something, right? They are just going close to Africa, right? And just a wind basically blows them all the way to the South America, whole different continent. This is such a long route that, one wind basically changes the route and they just reaches South America.
though, they arrived in China. They immediately asked to dock at a port much closer to Beijing than Canton. This was considered bad form by the Chinese.
Dude, do you know how long I've been sailing? Do you know how much distance I covered? I'm not walking 1 mile more. Just give me close to Beijing. I'm not, going to Canton or anything.
But representatives of the East India Company explained that they had expensive gifts for the emperor on board, and didn't want any of them to get ruined in a long overland journey, so the Chinese acquiesced. They and their goods were ferried up the Grand Canal to Beijing, and here they assembled their gifts and prepared for the last leg of their journey, over the Great Wall and to the Emperor's summer palace at Jahal. Here they finally met the Emperor. And trouble began immediately. Because in the presence of the Emperor, it was expected that everyone kowtow, or kneel and bow
shit.
so low that their head touched the floor. And Macartney,
British
being a
bowing?
seasoned
Hell
British
no.
governor and gentleman, hailing from what he believed was the most powerful and civilized nation in the world with, as he saw it,
It
the
was.
most divine monarch, and not only the right but the duty to spread the British way around the globe,
There you
refused to
go.
do so. After all, if he wasn't going to touch his head to the floor for King George, he certainly wasn't going to do it here. So, after some wrangling and protestations, he proposed a counter-solution. He would perform the kowtow so long as, every time it was done, a Chinese official of equal rank would kowtow to a picture of George III. This was, of course, ludicrous to the Chinese, as, after all, they were from the most powerful and civilized nation in the world, with the most divine monarch, and who was this barbarian to try to put his king on anything like the emperor's?
Okay, first of all, British have invaded and sacked lots of countries by then. So, their claim of being one of the most powerful countries in the world at that time is justified, right? I mean, British were that. British Empire was massive. Chinese, thinking that is kind of a hubris, right? Chinese were great and everything, but not at the level of British. So obviously that guy is not going to go into, basically this in front of the emperor and just bow down. How is he going to go home then? What is he going to tell to the British people? Like, I bow down in front of somebody?
Level. Seriously. But even without the
This
kowtow
is
issue
representing
truly
Britain right
resolved,
now.
with Macartney merely genuflecting in the end, as he would to King George, the meeting went forward. Macartney showed off the marvels of British science, although mostly the flashier and less practical kind, and presented them to the emperor. And here too, signals got crossed, because the Chinese court took this as a tribute mission. After all gift-giving missions to the emperor are tribute missions. What else would it be? And yet the British thought that they were demonstrating all the reasons that China would benefit from opening up trade with them. So in the end, Macartney was dismissed without the emperor agreeing to a single one of the goals he set out to.
Oh God. This is a real miscommunication between different cultures, right? I mean, British basically are thinking that by giving all this gift, it's a political move, right? In a way that this shows to see how good things we have. This will appease the emperor too. And, this could loosen the restriction and we could open up trade. It's just common sense. You win, I win. It's just win-win scenario. While the emperor, being emperor, thinking, "Oh, look at that! He just brought gifts for me, just out of respect." He's just living in completely different world.
To achieve. And the emperor sent one of the most gloriously, imperially snarky letters ever penned to King George, thanking him for his tribute, which, though neither he nor the Chinese actually wanted it, he would graciously accept out of respect for how far George had sent people just to pay him tribute. But no, China didn't need baubles or knickknacks from England, thank you. Trade would remain the way it was. So Britain was left with a massive trade deficit. The East India Company was £28 million in debt as a result of their war in India, and the royal coffers were nearly dry. They needed to find some product the Chinese wanted. And then they did. Opium.
There you go. Exactly. Now he's getting to the main thing here, opium. The description said it's about British and Chinese and tea. I'm like, it's an opium war. But yeah, there you go. Now they're getting to it. I guess opium is going to be so beneficial to them that they are going to basically attack China. Is that what's going to happen? I guess. Well, it's safe to assume British are involved in the basically previous century or two. It's basically they attacked somebody and just basically dominated, because that's what happens. Alright people, that was first Opium War, trade deficits and Macartney embassy. That was a real miscommunication between two cultures. That's what I saw here. Because they're not getting through each other. British should have just thought that, who am I dealing with? Who are these people and why are they restricting us? If they had figured that out, they could have approached this in better way, I guess. Because all the Chinese were doing that, we want to restrict outside influence right now. They're not thinking profit, trade and all things like that. Emperor is basically on his high throne, right? I'm the emperor, everybody bows down to me. Yeah, look at that. They brought gifts or whatever. They're not thinking the mutual benefits, compromise here and there so everybody profits. There is no compromise. It's an emperor. This is Chinese empire. They are just living in different thing entirely, basically. While British are thinking, you profit, I profit, basic common sense. But that's not what's happening here. Alright people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the week Sunday, there's a link in the description. Check out the cast of play, check out the end cards, and I'll see you next time.